You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. Obviously, I'm not Caralee Culpepper. I am Dale Sellers. And I felt like, Caralee has worked so hard over the summer, giving me a chance to take a break, that today we're going to record a podcast while she's on vacation. But the odd news is we're going to do it with Jon Sanders.
There you go. Here I am.
Man, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the way you filled in for me and gave me July off. I had just a time to relax and reflect on some things and also write. I'm working on my next book. And so I appreciate you guys stepping up like that and doing that for me. Means a lot.
Yeah, well, as our friends at Chick-fil-A say, it was my pleasure, Dale. So genuinely my pleasure.
Well, since you did a commercial, let's do this. We're going to take a short break and then we'll be right back to the podcast. Well, I'm so excited about us getting together today. One, I love talking to you anytime I can. And the topic we're going to focus on is in the arena of PTSD. But to set this up, when I asked you to do the podcast, I didn't recognize the timing of it all. I just got back from yesterday. I was at a retreat center that's been created by Pastor Greg Surratt and Doug Bullock. There's the friends of ours, and it's called the Retreat at Church Creek. And they have about, I think it's close to 60 acres right on an inlet on Johns Island real close to Charleston, South Carolina. And they've created a retreat center for pastors and staffers to come and just get away. And I just got back from that. Awesome. I was there. Jon, you would love it, man. It is fishing. It is, you can go out twice a day. They go out and fish the marshes for redfish and things like that. They've got a couple local ponds. They have deer hunting in the fall. They've got a dove field they've created. There's trails and it's just the coolest thing. And the thing I love about it is there's no agenda.
Love that.
You go there and they fix breakfast at 9 a.m. They do the fishing schedule, and then you do what you want all day long.
Can I say something about that, Dale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I jump in? One of my pet peeves over the years when I served as a lead pastor is you've got these different groups and retreat centers and whatnot, and I know their heart's in the right place. They love pastors. They want to serve pastors, but it's like, hey, pastor, come on out and, spend some time in our cabin at our retreat center. But then they want to sit you down and talk about your marriage, or they want to sit you down and, it's this structured sit-in class for 8 hours, and then, we'll give you a few. It's like, it always bugged me, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but it's like, I just want to go rest and be left alone. Well, I don't want to sit and talk with you about my marriage or get deep into my brain about what's going on in church world. Just let me rest. That's the whole point of this. So anyway,
what this is all about.
That sounds amazing. I love that.
Well, what we did was we'd have breakfast at 9 a.m. And then if you wanted to sign up to go out on one of the fishing trips, then they would sign you up to go on the fishing trip, and then you're on your own. And I love it because when we got there, they took us. They've got like 4 golf carts, the big ones, just, multiple people. And you go take when you want it. If you want to go ride on a tractor, you can ride on the tractor. You just go do anything. You can go to the refrigerator when you want to. One of the things they invested in was they bought really, really nice mattresses and pillowcases, pillows and sheets, so that when you sleep, you could actually rest. Wow. The lodge, I think, 6,000 square feet. So it's huge. It's beautiful. But the cool thing is you can sign up, and Pastor Greg, when he took us on the tour, he made this statement. He said, we've had some pastors, they come here and they just take a nap in the afternoon.
There you go.
I did it twice.
Amen. Praise God.
One, I get to fish in the fall. And one of the things that they do, and you'll appreciate this, is they try to get pastors to get outside. Not necessarily to fish or hunt or do that stuff, but just to get outside, because you can really connect with the Lord out there. And most 100%. Pastors don't do that. And so they got us out there, and we but I didn't need to go outside. We're recording this kind of toward the end of June, and it was hot. It was hot down there, and I didn't want to be on a boat for 3 hours out there. Mm-hmm. And so, but the only thing we do that is just so powerful is they have these long, like 20-foot tables, and we sit down at night, and man, the food is so amazing. I had the best low country boil I've ever had. I mean, it's not fair to call these jumbo shrimp because they're bigger than that, but they had all that stuff. And we actually ate the first meal out on the dock out in the inlet. So that was cool, but they feed us really well. But we sit around the table, and afterwards that evening, they just ask 1 or 2 questions, and just to keep it from being too long, we only like half the group answers it at one time. But I think one night was like, what's been your highest high and your lowest low? And Jon, this is I was with a group of 20 people that had never met before from all over America, all different denominations. And it got raw real quick. It got real quick. And some pastors got some major ministry. And so that was just the way things happened. So that's kind of a lead in. I just came back from that. I want to recommend it. We're going to do some things in the future at 95 Network. We're not making a shift away from what we've been doing, but we are going to begin to add a greater soul care piece to what we're doing. And actually, you made a statement on our team call a few weeks ago about how we feel called to pastor pastors. And so we're going to ramp that up a little bit more. We get some things happening behind the scenes now to do that. But you just got back from a particular conference you went to that I think will help minister to just relating what you went through to our listeners today. So kind of take a moment and kind of tell us what you just got through doing, and we'll kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, certainly. There's a backstory behind this, in terms of the context of it. But I spent last week down in Mississippi. It was also hot there as well. But we were doing a 3-day training, and it wasn't really a conference. It was more of a very small group of us getting trained by an organization that I ultimately heard about through the 95 podcast, and I can tell that story later if you want. But
I'd love to.
And they specialize in helping military and first responders really overcome PTSD, and it's really some groundbreaking kind of cutting edge brain science stuff that's dealing with a lot of words that I can't even fully pronounce and understand, but dealing with neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to heal and to rewire new neural pathways after a traumatic event. And so what I was trained in was kind of a method to sit down and have simple conversations with people where you don't even have to have them go into all of the details of their trauma. They don't even have to talk about it to me, but where we can, on kind of a subconscious level, help the strong emotional response get disconnected from that actual event. And there's some real brain science behind it that we can dig down into. But that's what I was dealing with, helping my brothers in the first responder community. But here's the thing, Dale, I can tell you as a guy who's been in and around pastoral ministry my entire life, as well as a first responder, there are so many similarities between pastoring and firefighting. I promise there's pastors out there that are, have some post-traumatic stress in their life as well. So this is a very relevant conversation for ministers of the gospel, no different than first responders.
Multiple times on the retreat that I was on, it came up and we discovered that pastors who were with us, just the 20 pastors that were together, I would say half of them are dealing with some form of PTSD.
Yeah.
And it became very apparent, and we stopped and ministered to them when that was happening. One of the things that happened, and I'll put in the show notes, I'll put the link to that podcast you referred to, we did with Conrad Weaver, because I had Conrad on because he's done a couple of documentaries, and this one was specifically with first responders, and something hit me that he said that I never thought of, and you already deal with this, so it didn't cross your mind to mention it. But first responders, they don't have traumatic stress once a month. They have it 3 or 4 times a day. Mm-hmm. They come up on some kind of gruesome scene, or they save someone, or they help put out a fire or whatever. And it's just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of traumatic stress. And I recognize that they really are. They need a pathway to begin to process and deal with this. And pastors, we have it too, but not quite to that level. But I think there's some things we can learn from what you experienced and what you learned that can help us today.
Yeah. And I just want to back up a minute and say one thing that we're learning in the world of, mental health is that it's not a helpful exercise to compare our trauma and go, well, I don't have trauma. I never served as a military, veteran. I never served in combat. Like, trauma is trauma, and it can be uniquely individual from what one person is, what's traumatic to one person versus another. So I want to say, hands down, pastors deal with trauma. Not only is there the trauma that we receive in ministry from being at the scene, in many ways we're just behind the first responders, right? We get the call when that family member's been killed in a car accident or a miscarriage or whatever. Like, we are at the scene of tragedy and sorrow. We see it there. We get secondary trauma when we sit and hear people share their stories of childhood sexual abuse and neglect and divorce and all these things. Like, we get to live out those emotions and experience that secondary trauma. And then anyone who's been leading in the church for more than about 10 minutes has also experienced firsthand trauma at the betrayal of people that you have loved and poured your heart and soul into, and they get close enough to stick a dagger in your back and twist the knife. Like, we've all experienced that. And so trauma is a real thing in pastoral ministry. It absolutely is. You don't have to be a, combat veteran or a first responder to have dealt with trauma.
To make your point, on Wednesday morning while I was at the retreat, I received this message from a pastor I've never personally met. And I thought I would read this as kind of a launch in to kind of talk through some of the things you guys worked through. And it says this, it says, "Good morning, Dale. I was turned on to the 95 network through the Mount Hope Bible Camp." Remember, you and I did that camp together. We taught the conference. He said, I was turned on a while back, and I've been a podcast listener since. He says, "What a wonderful birthday podcast." As we're recording this, I just released the one about turning 60. He said, "That's exactly what I needed. I will be 33 this September. I've been in ministry at the same church for the last 11 years, the last 5 years as the senior pastor. On June 1st, I started a sabbatical. Ministry has started to affect my family. My wife is struggling with some things that people have done and said, as am I. We decided we needed some time off to find out what the Lord had next for us. I had someone from the church call me this week and told me how wrong I was, and the church would be in shambles when I get back. I'm struggling even in my rest." And he puts that in quotes. "At this point, I don't even want to go back. And the enemy keeps telling me how big of a failure I am. It's a struggle." Wow. I literally got that email or that message this week. One of the pastors that we were with this past week, he was in the military for 11 years, and he did do combat. But his confession, if you will, as we were talking, he says, I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to rest. I can't stop working all the time. This particular pastor, John, he only sleeps 4 hours a day.
Wow.
He gets up at like 3:30 in the morning and he'll run 20 miles. I mean, and he says, I can't shut it down. Yeah. And when we helped him understand, some of the source of that was his trauma. Yeah. So, I know you've seen it with pastors, you've seen it in ministry, you've seen it in your, and maybe we should document the fact that you also do your firefighting thing in addition, in case someone's listening today. Kind of talk us through about, what you do personally, and then let's kind of go into some of the things you covered.
Yeah. So, I grew up in a pastor's home and then went into firefighting as a career, and then God messed up all my plans and thought it'd be a good idea for me to be a pastor too. I didn't necessarily agree at the time, but I obeyed. And so was a church planter for a good 18 years. And really about 17 years when I stepped out right before the pandemic hit. I stepped down from the lead pastor role. And somewhere in that time frame, I also had the opportunity to go back into full-time firefighting. So I've had a foot in both of those worlds of pastoring and firefighting, kind of a unique perspective on the world, I guess, through both of those careers. And the second time that I got involved in the full-time fire service, as a full-time pastor, now going back into full-time firefighting, I knew there was more of a ministry component beyond just, I like running fire calls and, hanging out at the station with the guys. I knew it was a deeper purpose. And it didn't take long when I got on the fire department there in Sioux Falls to get invited into a brand new peer support team that we were building. Because here's the thing, Dale, and this is what Conrad was sharing on the episode that you had him on, in which I connected with him and then learned about this group where I spent some time last week getting trained, is that In the first responder community, we lose more of our members every year to suicide than to the dangers of the job. And that's true
That's
of police
amazing.
officers. The average police officer, the average age of death of a police officer is 62 years old.
Unbelievable.
That's also the average age of their retirement. So what does that tell you? You know, like they basically don't make it very long after their career is over. And firefighting is not much different. It's stress, man. Like stress is what is killing our first responders, because it's stress that is not dealt with in a healthy way. It's stress that is going unnoticed, or we don't recognize the symptoms of it. And so we run from it. We medicate it with alcohol. We don't get good sleep. I mean, there's so much behind this. And Dale, one thing I really feel compelled to say, I want anyone that's listening to this who's smarter than me in this area to know I don't have any fancy letters behind my name. So if you hear me say something that's like, that's not exactly what I learned in my doctorate program, I've never been through a doctorate program. I'm not an expert in this stuff, but I've been around it enough. I've read enough about it to know that there's some real things that we're starting to wake up to in the first responder community. And we're starting to know things now as they continue to study the human brain. We're starting to recognize that for years, there was just this stigma. If you were struggling with mental illness, or if there was something that was bothering you mentally, there was this stigma that said, well, you must not be tough enough to do the job, you know, and something's wrong with you. You're weak. So what that led to was a lot of our members in the first responder world suffering in isolation, alone, feeling like I'm the only one. Pastoring, it's no different. We just give a little bit more of a spiritual spin to it. Well, pastor, you just need to read your Bible and pray. Well, we all think that reading your Bible and praying is a good discipline, and there's great value there. But there's things that just reading your Bible and praying is not going to do for your brain that sleep can do, and that exercise can do, and that proper nutrition and that managing stress in a healthy way. It's a holistic approach.
Yes.
So I think that we're finally starting to now have these conversations at certain levels of the first responder world, and hopefully within the church as well.
Well, you remember I had it was odd. I did not know that the emotions were still so raw from my experience last year when I almost drowned. So, but as I'm at the retreat and I'm sharing with some of the pastors about it, dude, I lost it 2 or 3 times. I couldn't believe it. It was almost like it just happened again. And I was really shocked by that, because it's been a year since that experience happened. And if those listening don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out the podcast that I did about my unexpected sabbatical last year.
It was titled "How to Have a Crappy Sabbatical" by Dale Sellers.
I tell you what, it might as well have been. It did not go the way it needed to go. But I went to counseling. And while I'm there in counseling, Bob Hamp, my friend, was my counselor. He talks a lot about the brain. He understands the brain. He also obviously is a Christian and gives the word of God. But he just talked about how that with trauma, if you don't find an off ramp for it to put it somewhere in your thinking and your past, it just keeps cycling. And what he helped me understand was that I was multiple layers of a lifetime with the trauma. And the whole time you're just talking about what first responders deal with, I'm going, but that's pastors have the same problem. Yep. Yeah, we're told to suck it up. Man, if you're spiritual, you shouldn't have any problems. And I've told this story. I think I've told this on a podcast, but I want to make sure if I haven't that I'll share this. There was a time when I was pastoring our church and I was so stressed out many years ago. And John, I was in bad shape, man. I don't mean I wasn't having a moral failure. I did have high blood pressure and stress, but I wasn't that kind of thing. The church just wasn't doing well. And I had one of my board members I felt a little closer to than the rest. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. I went to my board member. We went to lunch together, which we often did. And I said, hey, man, I want to talk to you about some things today that's kind of going on in my life. And I said, I feel like I just need to talk to somebody. And so I just began to share with him just a little bit of some of the things that I was experiencing. He put his hand up and stopped me. And I'll never forget this. He said, Pastor, I don't want to hear this. He said, my life is a disaster, and I need your life to be perfect. So please don't tell me this. And I went, wow, man, who can I talk to? Yeah. And I didn't talk to anybody. I began to internalize stuff. And many of our listeners will know that at 52 years old, I had quadruple bypass surgery. I asked my surgeon, I said, there's no heart disease in our family. I'm not severely overweight. I've never smoked except in high school. And I didn't inhale because that's terrible for your lungs. So I just, stuck it and blew it back out to be cool. But I've never, and I said, how did this happen to me? He goes, hypertension and high blood pressure because of your vocation. Yeah. And I said, are you saying that the ministry almost killed me? He said, that's exactly what I'm saying, Dale. I'll never forget that, John. Well, we're losing ministry. We're losing ministers now, not at the level that obviously in the first responders field, but we're losing ministers to suicide. Absolutely. I had a conversation last week with a fellow who works with pastors to try to do prevention, who've already said something about they've given an indication. I'm not sure I want to keep on living, and this guy helps them. But when I talked to this guy a few weeks ago, he said he literally just lost a guy that week who just decided in ministry. And, and there's other famous people. There was one pastor, I won't go into all these details, but he went through depression, went through some difficulties, had some moral failures, but came back in ministry and then took his life, famous across America, took his life on Suicide Prevention Day. And so this is why we're having this conversation again. And we're going to have it some more from different angles, because pastors, you've been fed a lie, just like I was fed a lie, just like John was fed a lie. You've been fed a lie that says that pastors are supposed to be perfect and we can't have any problems and we're wimpy for reaching out for help. And it's just not true. So here's what I'd like for you to do. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say, take a few moments and kind of tell us what did you guys work through at this as you got away?
And that I can say what I was going to say in answering that question. So I'd love to take a stab at describing on a very basic level what is happening in the brain when we encounter a traumatic event. Please do. And this is, we need to understand this. So there's a part of our brain, because God created all of this. He made our human brain to do what it does. And there's the amygdala, which is part of our brain that is responsible for what we call the fight or flight response. So when we encounter a traumatic event, our brain says, I'm not safe. There is a threat here. And so it takes us to this fight or flight or freeze. And we will do one of those things. Now, again, that serves a very good purpose for our humanity, because it helps protect us. It helps keep us safe. But if we don't deal with the emotions that get attached to that event, if we don't process that stress, and everybody goes through trauma. And so as a result, all of us have post-traumatic stress. There's stress that results from that traumatic event. But if we don't process it, if we're not aware of these things, if we just put our head down and keep going, what PTSD is really, a simple way to think about it is the brain's ability to, at a moment's notice, just bring it all right back. And we're still living. And Dale, you're in that. Like, if you can, a year later, bring all those real emotions right back to the surface, it's because if we were to do brain mapping, and in this group I spent some time with last week, they're doing this right now. They have a grant to do brain mapping, like the before and afters of the clients that they're working with. And the before brain scans, I mean, that area of the amygdala is just lit up. And by the way, Dale, what happens when that is kind of running the show, the other part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for logic and reasoning, it gets shut down. That's why we get tunnel vision. That's why we make some really bad decisions when we're constantly in that state of fight or flight. Our cortisol levels are up, and cortisol is only good for a moment to give us fuel to respond to an emergency. But if those levels stay high, it has devastating effect to our body health. And again, this is just a very basic description of it.
Yes.
But what I learned last week, there's this group, I'm going to name them because again, your guest, Conrad Weaver, when I reached out to him, he told me, he said, you need to look into this group. Their name is 22-0. And it's the number 22 and then the word 0 behind it. The number 22 is significant. That's what statistics say. We're losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. And the goal of this organization is to see that number become a 0. And they are implementing a process called the Tactical Resilience Protocol. And it's a very simple conversation where you sit down with somebody, and I won't go deep into the details of it, but where you can essentially work with their subconscious mind to process the trauma and disconnect the emotions of that event. And so there's some strategy of how they do that. But here's what I want pastors to hear, even you, Dale. Like, I could sit down with you and kind of run through this process. It takes maybe 15, 20 minutes to have a conversation. And it's all, by the way, this isn't weird stuff. I'm not hypnotizing you. You're not losing any conscious thought. No, you don't have to smoke anything. You don't have to eat peanut butter and stand on your head and, sing the national anthem backwards. It's not weird, but it's your subconscious mind processes that traumatic event. Mm-hmm. And as that happens, and as we're able to kind of work through some of that, you are disconnecting that strong emotional response. I'll tell one quick story and then I'll give it back to you, Dale. Before I went into this training, I had to do like 6 hours of pre-course work with this group. And as a part of that, I'm watching some like Zoom calls where they were doing this protocol with different first responders and military people. And I am watching on the screen like a noticeable, you almost see something lift off of them when those emotions are kind of released. And I'm like, either these people are paid actors, but my radar wasn't going off like that. I was like, this is legit. Like, these people are genuinely getting helped. And last week when we were all together in Mississippi, I'm gathered in a room of about 12. I'd say about half of the group was people with a bunch of letters behind their name, certified counselors, mm-hmm. professional therapists, and that. And then there was a few of us, just normal first responder military people in the room. And one of the guys in the room was a combat veteran. He was a combat medic. And when they took him through, we all had to kind of go through this protocol as a part of learning how to do it. And man, it triggered some high emotional responses in him as he was being asked to think about some of the traumatic events. And that dude was a different guy who walked out of that room than the guy who walked in. I mean, in each of the 3 days that we were there, they would check in with us in the morning. How did you sleep? And this guy was just a completely different guy. He said he was able to sleep for the first time in a long time. One of the reasons we don't sleep when that amygdala is all fired up is because we're not getting into that REM sleep, which is where our brain processes and files away things more appropriately. And so one of the results that this group is really helping people get is after they go through this, they report exactly what that guy said. I've been able to sleep again. Like, I can dream dreams. I wasn't dreaming for years. And again, that's a sign that your body's not getting into that REM sleep cycle where your brain is restoring and processing. So it's really fascinating. It's rooted in brain science of the very thing that God created for us, and I think it's exciting, the potential that this has to serve people as a whole, not just military and first responders, but pastors included. So I'm excited about it.
I got somewhere I'm going to go with you. We're going to take a short break here. And after the break, I'm going to add another F, because we said fight, flight, and freeze. And so after the break, I'm going to give you another one. So we'll take a quick break and be right back. Okay. So here's my other F. And I think it fits pastors. I don't know.
Be careful, Dale. This is a Christian podcast. So watch what you're about to say.
So here we go. Fake it. I think a lot of pastors, they don't know that they're fighting and, fight, flight, freeze, but they've been faking it for a long time. And so that leads me to ask you this question. How did it affect you when you went through those?
Well, I'm going to be very transparent with you, Dale. So I knew going down there that as part of our training, we would have to go through this. And I want to be so careful in how I say this, because I verbalized this. I had kind of a vulnerable moment with the group, and I said this to them as well. I don't want to come off sounding like the guy that doesn't have any trauma, because I know I have experienced trauma in ministry.
I've known you long enough to know that.
Yeah, it's true. So I didn't want to be, but having said that, like, I couldn't think of like, what's a traumatic event that I still feel a strong emotional connection to. And I really can't come up with one. So I'll be honest, when I went through the thing, I picked a painful thing from ministry. It had nothing to do with firefighting. It was pastoring is where I went. But having said that, I feel like I've processed so much of the trauma that I've been through in a healthy way. And so when I verbalized that to the class, the guy that was our instructor and leading it, he kind of in front of everybody just started running me down a checklist of things. And and said, one of his questions was, do you sleep well at night? Do you dream dreams? And I said, yeah, I do. And I do sleep well. I wake up feeling rested. And, he had a number of other questions for me about, do I process this well? By the way, this is a whole nother thing. And I will come back to this, as this is really powerful too, Dale. But basically he made the point, it is okay to be okay. Yes. And it is like, resiliency is a real thing. That's the whole goal of this, is to help us become resilient to where we can endure a traumatic event, process it in a healthy way, and move on and function, where we're not stuck and kind of trapped back there at that place of trauma. So by no means do I want to hold myself up as like this perfect specimen who's got it all figured out. But having said that, I did struggle. So what they said is, if you come in with this traumatic event, they would want you to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10, with like where you are in terms of your negative emotions of fear, terror, helplessness. The higher you would rate that number, the much greater results you're going to see, in the aftermath, versus if you're at like a 2 or a 3, you're not going to sense a great, movement in that, if that makes sense. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but let me throw this in. And then
before you go there, let me give a perspective on why I think you answered it that way. And again, you and I have known each other for 2 years. We've talked around this. You've never gone into the details about it. And you may have on the podcast you did with Caralee, because I haven't heard it yet. But you and Jess went through some seasons where y'all had to get marriage counseling.
Yeah.
And you've talked about that openly. So, I don't know the details, and I don't want to know the details, but you went through a period of time. So you are probably healthier in other arenas of your life because you sought help in that arena of your life.
Right.
And so there may be pastors listening, or listeners of any arena listening, going, well, I'm kind of like Jon. Well, it may be because you've already started a process in your life at some point of talking out stuff, of working through stuff. And the reason I shared that is I had one of our pastors, Pastor Rusty, who I've known since I've been at 95 Network, reached out to me. He literally is on sabbatical, reached out to me today, and I responded. And he says, I'm working on some things. I'm thinking about doing my doctorate in some areas. He said, I want to ask you a question. I'd like you to answer for me. He says, if you look back at ministry, what would you do differently today than, you've been doing it for 40 years, Dale. If you had a chance to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And, that's a typical question, but my answer surprised me. And I wrote him back today and I said, here's what I would do differently. I said, I would have sought out a mentor that I could be honest with. And I'm going to get honest right now. I couldn't talk to my dad. A lot of our listeners have great relationships with their dad, but my dad, I could not tell my dad anything private or personal, because my dad he would tell it. Daddy, if he got any kind of information, he just shared it. Mm-hmm. And so instead of seeking out someone else that I could be transparent with, I had mentors, but I didn't have mentors that I was around enough to get this stuff out.
Yep.
If I could do it all over again, I'd seek out somebody that I could get real with.
Yeah.
And because I know the effect it has. And so I shared that. Wow. I shared that with you because I know, and you have openly shared it since I've known you, that you guys went for marriage counseling, and you don't say it embarrassed.
Yeah.
Some guys are like embarrassed. No, I admired you because I'm going, the man had enough sense to go get help.
Yeah.
And so I feel like at least that should, and maybe it doesn't apply at all, but for me personally, it's like, I feel like that's maybe why you answered that way, because you've already sought help before. Does that make sense?
Well, that's certainly part of it, Dale. I'll just be honest. Like, over the years, with God's help, I have humbled myself in front of other people by asking for help, by surrounding myself with strong relationships with other men who can speak into my life. And again, there's plenty of fault to find in my life, so I don't want to hold myself up as someone who's figured it all out. But I do know that in some of these major categories, I've done some things that are healthy in terms of being vulnerable and transparent and talking through some of these issues that have helped me stay maybe ahead of some of those traumatic things, because they're there. Like, I could tell stories of really bad things I've seen both in ministry and certainly in the first responder world where, man, it does bother you. And by the way, here's another thing too, like this kind of scares me a little in the back of my head. Something we see in the first responder world is it's not uncommon for people to come to the end of their career And all of a sudden it's an accumulative trauma where they maybe have long forgotten about some of these calls. And now they're starting to get flashbacks and like, it's this accumulative effect. So that's not lost on me either. Yeah. That at some point at any point, I could start experiencing some real negative stuff. Gratefully, I'm at least aware of it. If that happens, I can know, like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. This is my body is holding on to certain things, because your brain doesn't just forget this stuff that you see. But Dale, first of all, thank you for sharing what you shared about your father, because that sets this up so well for something that came out of this training. I've never heard this before, and every pastor listening needs to hear what I'm about to say. In the mental health world, something that they study is called the ACE score, or ACEs, and ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And if you let me, I'll go through. I pulled up some of the PowerPoint that they shared with us. But here's the big idea. Like, if most trained clinicians, therapists, whatever, they have this ACE score that they'll slide across the table to you. They gave it to us as well. And it's 10 questions about your childhood, and anything with a 4 or more. So it's a yes or no. Did this happen in your childhood? If you have 4 or more of these in your childhood, I'm going to share some statistics with you here in just a moment. But you are already much more prone to some of these issues. And why does this matter? First of all, as pastors, we ought to know this for the people we're serving. Sure. But Dale, I would contend we have a whole bunch of men and women serving in ministry that if they were to take that score, that simple little assessment, they would find out, oh my goodness, like I have been running from stuff in my childhood, either that I knew about, or maybe I did not even aware to the degree that it was affecting my adult life and some of the decisions I'm making. But I'm just going to flip over into my screen here and share a few of these things, not with you, but I'm just looking at them here. So they say anybody with an ACE score of 4 or more, you're 1.4 times more likely to develop diabetes, 2.1 times more likely to develop obesity, 2.1 times more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, 2.3 times more likely to develop cancer, 3.7 times more likely to develop anxiety, 4.5 times more likely to develop PTSD, 4.7 times more likely to develop depression, 6.9 times more likely to develop alcohol use, 8.1 times more likely to be a violence perpetrator. It gets better, 10.5 times more likely to develop suicidal ideation, and 37.5 times more likely to attempt suicide. And these numbers, Dale, are coming from a massive study that was done over the course of about 20 years of 17,000 children that they've tracked. So these are hard numbers in this field. And I say all of that to just make the point that for many of us, forget about the trauma that we're experiencing right now. Like so many of us are dealing with trauma that took place as a kid. And so Dale, when I filled out that thing, and I give God all the praise and glory, I'm just so grateful. My score was a 0 on that. Like I did not have any of those. I couldn't answer yes to a single one of those questions.
You're just in denial.
Well, I looked at that, like, is that the case? But no, they're very clear. And I'm like, no, like my childhood was not perfect. My parents were not perfect. Sure. I've dealt with some pain much later in life, at the hands of my dad. Yep. But as a child, I was given by God's grace a very firm foundation in which to grow. And I did not realize until I sat through this training this last week just how much that has helped me be a resilient adult to go through some of this. So anyway, for our pastors listening, like they just need to know if you're dealing with trauma, help is available. And there's reasons that your brain is doing what it's doing. And if you're in a place where you're like, man, I can't sleep, I'm dealing with all these health issues, like let's just agree this isn't normal. It's not God's will for your life. And we can get you in a better place. We can help you get to a better place.
Well, it is normal if that's what they're doing all the time. It's kind of like when my heart was blocked up, people said, did you feel it? Because I had a widowmaker, and the only reason we discovered it was because I had applied for a renewal of a term insurance policy, and the EKG came back abnormal. So I didn't know. I had some symptoms of something, but I didn't know what it was. but I just thought I was old. So what I'm saying is, it is normal that they're going down this path. It's normal to them, even though it's abnormal. And I want to say this, and can you read those 10 questions? Is it okay to do that? Or is that breaking any rules?
I turned the sheet. No, I can't. It's out there. I bet if I don't have it in front of me, if you Google ACEs score, you'll get those 10 questions. So
well, I was going to share a story, so I don't know if you could pull it up while I'm sharing the story.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead. I'll look for it.
So when I went to counseling, again, I want to make sure, because I keep assuming everyone's heard the podcast. But last year, I almost drowned, and I was on sabbatical, and it broke me. And so I ended up and I don't mean financially, it broke me emotionally. I finally got to the point I can't handle this. And so I went to counseling. So much of everything you've said today was exactly the realm of our counseling. And my counselor, Bob, helped me to realize that when I was a 6-year-old kid, and I want to be really fair to my parents, I saw my parents get in one fight ever. They did not. If they fought, I don't know that they did. They may, but they, of course, after the way I responded, maybe they didn't do it in front of me. But I was a 6-year-old kid, and and as I tell you this story, I see Mama putting her hands over her face, over her eyes, crying, running across the hall, and Daddy yelling about something. That only happened once. That was 6 years old. I went to school the next day. So I'm in the first grade. I went to school the next day, and I broke down, started crying, and the teacher was like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "My mom and dad are getting a divorce." Well, and so then the teacher calls Mommy in and said, "You need to talk to Dale. He thinks," and of course, she was so embarrassed. Bob helped me to understand, John, that at that moment, I assumed upon me the responsibility of holding my family together.
There you go.
And everything that I have done in life from 6 to 60 was to try to hold everybody else together.
There you go.
That's why I wrote Stalled. And see, and when I wrote Stalled, I thought I'd gotten it all out of me. But last year I discovered I had not gotten out of me. And Bob said this about me. And so I hope that but pastors and leaders, this is why we share these podcasts. Bob said to me, he said, "Dale, you got to put your mask on first." Mm-hmm. See, I didn't know this. This is also cool how God does it. I've always heard, I get, because I fly a lot, put your mask on first. But I didn't know that basically they said if the cabin depressurizes and that mask thing flops, you've got about 3 to 5 seconds to get your mask on before you pass out. And if you pass out, you could die, or I don't know how it turns out, but you certainly can't help anybody else. I have spent my entire life trying to put everybody else's mask on when I was suffocating.
Yep.
And so this is why I keep hanging here. And maybe the 95 podcast is just Dale's therapy session. I don't know, but I just am learning so much about myself. And I'm not one of these guys that says everything in your life goes back to your childhood. But here's what I discovered. My father did not, he did not protect us emotionally. My father was physically there. He worked very hard. He taught me how to work. I love my dad. He did a great job, but my dad did not support us emotionally. Yeah. And it could be for lots of reasons. I'm not being critical here. I just realized that I took it upon myself as a child, as a teenager, when I was in college, and I've done it in ministry. And basically the Lord has shown me, he's clearly said to me last year, you can't go forward with 95 Network the way you are. You got to work this stuff out.
Dale, one of the things that I think is so important to mention here, the value in going back and really looking at our childhood isn't, and you're not saying this, it isn't to place blame on our parents or to be a victim and to say, I can now blame someone else for the problems in my life. Yep. It's from a place of self-awareness to recognize we are, because of sin, we're all brought up from imperfect parents, and that is the only roadmap that we are given. For good and bad. Like, we get some of the good things from our parents, and we get all kinds of not so good things from our parents because they're flawed, sinful, hurt people as well.
They got it from theirs.
Yeah. And so we're just, the value in it is not so we can blame someone and have an excuse. It's to recognize, oh my goodness, like there's stuff from my childhood that is still affecting my life today. The good news is there's hope, and there's a way around some of this stuff, and there's growth from it. Yes. But if you're not aware of it, like you said, Dale, you can spend decades of your life running without, like this other pastor, without the ability to shut it off and really understand, what are you running from? Why are you constantly on this treadmill of performance? Whose voice are you really hearing there? And
that's so good, John. That describes me. That describes.
I was able to find this ACEs. You want to read through these 10 questions for our audience?
We have to read through them and not comment on them because we're going to run out of time. But
Okay.
I want to throw the questions out there, and then what we'll do is there a link? Can I put a link in the show notes to it, so if they want to go back and look at it even further?
Yeah, we'll get you a link. I grabbed the first one I found when I Googled, so but they're all the same questions.
Not breaking any rules. Okay, so I want to do that, and then I want to wrap the podcast up in the way we typically do. So let's dive into those, and I won't interrupt, and we want to elaborate. And I
won't commentate, but here they are. So score yourself at home, Pastor. Mm-hmm. Yes or no? How many of these can you answer yes to? Number one, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt? Question number two, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Number three, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have, I won't say all the words there, but basically sexual molestation? Okay. Number four, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or B, your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Number five, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you, or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Number six, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Number seven, was your parent or caregiver often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Basically, this is asking about, did you see physical abuse against one of your parents or one of your parents? Number eight, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or used street drugs? Number nine, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And number 10, did a household member go to prison? So in our class, Dale, we had people that were scoring 7 out of those 10. And so here I'm sitting with a 0 going, God, thank you. Like, I wish that was more normal for kids, but I realize after sitting through this training, like, what a gift I had growing up from parents that provided a household where I didn't see any of this ever. So
my answer is the same as yours. 0. Good. I had a 0 to the specific questions you answered, and I still developed the problems I developed.
Yeah. Well, I unearthed a few even in that thing. Again, not yeses to this, but stuff from childhood that where I look back and go, I can see where that is affecting me even to this day as an adult.
I think my biggest deal was I just assumed, because I felt like Dad was not present on the emotional side, I assumed it upon myself that I had, because my mom's already passed, but my mom used to do this. And if you do this, please stop doing this. Mom used to tell me all the time, I'm just going to leave your dad. I can't put up with this anymore, because she was mad about something. Well, see, as you're a kid, you take that, you believe she's just venting. But you think that, it's a venting, I should say, for those who don't understand Southern talk. She's just blowing off steam because she didn't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
So she did it to me. And I've got another dear family that was in the church that I used to pastor. And I finally went to the mom one day. I said, you got to quit unloading on your oldest daughter. You're killing her.
Yeah.
Because you go find your help, go find counseling, go out, reach out and get somebody professional, find someone. And so to kind of pull this all back in and wrap it up, pastors, we love you. We're willing to get raw. I'm sharing stuff with you today that I'm not even comfortable sharing sometimes, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm being critical of my family, because I'm not. But I recognize my family history has created who I am today. Yeah. And my trauma is not the same as a first responder's trauma, but it's trauma.
It's trauma.
And I didn't know until we had Carl Vaders on in May of last year, when he talked about the emotional impact of the pandemic on pastors. I never heard the trauma used, and I didn't know what it was, but through Carl and Bob and Polly Hamp and talking to different people, I've discovered that it's such a real deal, and it's crippling our effectiveness as pastors.
Yep.
So as we wrap this thing up, you can go anywhere you want to with this, but I'd love for you to share a word of hope or encouragement or wisdom for pastors that maybe this hit a nerve today, maybe some next steps or anything that you feel like would be pertinent to share with these guys and ladies as we wrap it up.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it real brief, Pastor. There is hope. There is hope. Like if you're struggling with this, there's a way through this to brighter, better days. And it's not by faking it. Like Dale said earlier, it's not by pretending that there's not a problem and just read your Bible and pray more. We can get you the real help that you need to truly process this trauma and move on to a healthier place that you may be in the moment thinking is not possible for you. I would make myself available, Dale, free of charge to any pastor that would want to reach out and go through that tactical resilience protocol, that method that I learned. I've already had a few conversations with some people on my department about it, and it's helping people. So if there's any pastor that says, man, I have some really, I'm at a scale of 8, 9, 10 on that 1 out or 0 out of 10 scale on emotions surrounding an event that you want to talk, let's get on a Zoom call together, and I'll be happy to take you through this process and help you get some help. So there is hope available. You don't have to stay there, and don't walk through this alone. Like we're here to walk beside you through it. So reach out.
I'll include Jon's email in the show notes for today. And obviously you can find Jon just by going to 95network.org and look at who we are, because he's there as well. But we want to help you, pastors. We at 95 Network, we don't want to just keep, we offer things in coaching and strategic arenas and things like that. And we're going to continue to do that because it's very important. But right now, what we're discovering is everybody's so broken. And the pandemic, I don't know that it caused it, but it revealed it. And I think Jesus is using this in a powerful way to get our churches healthy, because we've always said at 95 Network, a healthy pastor can create a healthy church. And so we want to help you. So thank you so much, Jon, for sharing this. And I do believe that it's going to minister a lot of folks. And folks, we are here to help you any way we can. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can help you.
Fantastic. It's been my pleasure hanging out with you, Dale. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.